ice type Pokemon today, and that is Swinup, which is known as the big Pokemon. The big Pokemon. Now, Swinup is an ice and ground type Pokemon, and it has been observed in multiple cold and frozen areas throughout the world. Swinup is a small Pokemon. It measures around 0.4 meters tall, or about 1 foot and 4 inches, and it weighs approximately 6.5 kilograms or 14.3 pounds. Now, as you can see, its body is covered almost entirely in this thick brown fur, and this fur gives Swinup its sort of distinctive appearance, making it look like, a small, furry sort of like mound, I guess, which is moving through the snow. Its legs are very, very, very short, and they're mostly hidden beneath all this fur that it has. And this allows it to move through snowy environment while maintaining a low profile while not being seen very much. Its eyes are also very much covered in this fur, making it look like, its face is mostly covered by everything. But there's one big feature that sticks out, which is, as you can probably imagine, its snout, its nose, essentially, right? And this is because its snout, its nose, is one of Swinup's most important tools or characteristics, or, things that it has about it. According to a lot of records that we have, Swinup relies heavily on its nose and specifically on its sense of smell. When searching for food, it uses its nose to locate hidden things beneath snow, for example, because obviously it lives in snowy areas, and this can be either roads, mushrooms, any type of food that you may find hidden underneath the snow. So this is very different from your, generic way of finding food, which would be through seeing, how we look at something, we see it, and we're like, okay, I can eat this. Swinup does this primarily by smell, and it's often keeping its nose very close to the ground, investigating its surroundings as it moves, making sure, okay, is there anything I can sniff up and be like, okay, maybe I can eat here, So it is quite common to see Swinup, rubbing its nose against the ground to look for food or anything that may be hidden beneath the snow. This behavior is obviously very useful in the frozen and really cold environment where it lives, because during the cold seasons, which are really long in the areas where it lives, a lot of the vegetation, a lot of plants, a lot of the food sources are probably going to be hidden beneath layers and layers of snow, and you can't just have a Pokemon digging randomly to look for food. They have to know where the food is and be like, okay, I'm going to dig here to get to whatever I need, whatever it is that I smelled up. So Swinup will search underneath the snow. Nice. So as I said, it lives in very cold and snowy areas, and it actually will thrive in these areas and in these frozen mountains, snowy fields, all that good stuff, because it can search through all this food hidden in the ground, right? For example, they can be commonly seen in the ice cave in Johto, or for example, if you like the Simo region in Route 217, that's up in the north. But yeah, imagine being in a snowy mountain region where everything around you is covered in white snow, everything is identical, and you need to find, some sort of food to keep yourself alive. Well, Swinup is here with its powerful nose to help out. For many Pokemon, obviously finding food in this environment would be very difficult, and it might even be a matter of life and death. So Swinup has to use this unique advantage that it has over other Pokemon to survive and even potentially thrive in these conditions, which is why they're still living in these types of areas, right? Another fascinating fact about Swinup's nose is that it apparently has the ability to locate hot springs hidden beneath the frozen ground. yeah, there has been a lot of records of Swinup being able to locate hot springs in the area using its sense of smell too, which can be very, very helpful. As I said, you don't want to be freezing all the time. Maybe you want to be a little bit warmer. Well, there you go. So, you might be wondering as well, where does the name Swinup come from, right? You might be able to imagine, because it's quite straightforward. The name Swinup is a combination of the words swine and nub. There you go. A swine is basically a pig, which is why it's called the pig Pokemon, and also because Swinup looks like a pig a little bit. And nub refers to something small or short, which fits Swinup's tiny size and rounded appearance very nicely. So essentially, Swinup is a small pig-like Pokemon. Very nice. So, before we move on to Swinup's moves and abilities and all that stuff, let's take a little closer look at some of its characteristics. Now, despite its small size, Swinup's body is extremely well suited for the cold environments. As I said, its thick fur helps protect it from freezing temperatures, and its compact body, it's all close together, makes it so that Swinup is able to conserve its heat. It also, as I said, has a very strong sense of smell, so it can navigate the areas really well. So, especially for areas where, you might have a lot of fog or a lot of snowfall, I guess, and visibility will be limited. But with this powerful nose, visibility issues will not be an issue for Swinup. So, let's now look at Swinup's type combination, right? Because as I said, Swinup is an ice and ground type Pokemon, which is quite an unusual combination. So unusual, in fact, that Swinup and obviously its evolutions are the only Pokemon that are ice and ground types, at least known to date. Now, I think these two types perfectly represent its lifestyle, how it lives. The ice type obviously represents the frozen environment where it lives, and the ground type represents, the fact that it's always with its nose on the ground, smelling around and, searching for food and surviving essentially. Now, when it comes to Pokemon battling, the combination of ice and ground type attacks and typing is quite a powerful offensive option, because ice type attacks are strong or super effective against flying, ground, grass, and dragon type Pokemon, and then ground type attacks are powerful against fire, electric, poison, rock, and steel type Pokemon. So just because of its two types, it can hit 9 different types. So half of the types for super effective damage, right? And with this typing, it means that poison type attacks will not do much damage against Swinup. And Swinup is also completely immune to electric type attacks. So electric type attacks will do no damage at all to Swinup. However, on the downside, this also comes with a bunch of weaknesses, right? Swinup, because of its ground and ice typing, means that they are weak to fighting fire, water, grass, and steel type attacks. So that's 5 weaknesses, and some of them, fire, water, and grass, which are commonly the 3 starter types. It's a bit of a common weakness to have. Although, as I said, it has a lot of offensive capabilities. You still have to be careful because it has a bunch of important weaknesses as well. So now that we got the typing out of the way, let's look at, we're talking about all these offenses and defenses. What can Swinup do in battle, right? Let's look at some of its moves and some of its abilities. Starting off with some of its moves. They're quite fitting for a small Pokemon that survives in snowy environments, They don't rely on overwhelming strength, at least not the first evolution. This is, it's quite common for first evolutionary Pokemon to not have the most powerful, amazing moves, right? But some of its most recognizable ice-type moves, for example, is Powder Snow, which allows Swinup to release a cloud of freezing snow towards his opponent. Again, while it is not the strongest of ice-type attacks, I think it perfectly reflects Swinup's, ice typing and the snowy region where it lives. And for a ground type move, it learns the move Mud Slap, which allows Swinup to throw mud at its opponent, which also does damage, and it allows him to hopefully lower the opponent's accuracy. So they can use this move sort of defensively to make it more difficult for opponents to hit Swinup. Another interesting move that Swinup learns is called Endure. Now, Endure allows Swinup to withstand a powerful attack that would normally knock it out. So, for example, say you hit Swinup with a really strong attack, but Swinup has used Endure. It will tank the attack, it will take the attack on and hold on with 1 HP at minimum. So this, I think, shows Swinup's determined nature, surviving in the cold, challenging the environment, making sure that you always endure the cold weather and you're always still standing. And that's just some of Swinup's most fitting moves, I think, or most, moves that you'd see on a Swinup. Now, when we look at its abilities, Swinup has 3 different abilities that it can learn, and they're all very different. So let's go through all 3 of them right now. So, the first one is called Oblivious. Now, what this does is it prevents Swinup from becoming infatuated, being affected by moves that have relationship to attraction, taunt, or intimidation, right? So it cannot be infatuated, I guess. It cannot be taunted and it cannot be intimidated. So basically, Swinup remains focused on its goal and cannot be distracted. And considering how much of Swinup's life revolves around searching for food in these really complicated environments, I think the ability to stay focused and determined matches it really well. So Oblivious, even though I have a name, it sounds a bit like, oh, this Pokemon's a little bit unaware of what's going on. That's not quite it. It's more it's focused on what needs to be done, I guess. The second ability that Swinup gets is called Snow Cloak. Now, Snow Cloak will increase Swinup's evasiveness during snow or hail conditions, right? So, this represents how suited Swinup is for snowy environments. So when it's surrounded by a lot of heavy snowfall, for example, Swinup will use the snowfall to become more difficult for the opponent to hit, which is also really nice. And considering especially that it lives in these frozen regions where hail and snowfall are quite common, being harder to hit in these conditions is always good. And finally, we have the third ability, which is Swinup's hidden ability, and this one is called Thick Fat. Thick Fat. Now, Thick Fat will reduce the damage that Swinup receives from ice and from fire type attacks. So, this is quite interesting because obviously this has to do with the thick fur that Swinup has around its body, right? So, even if Swinup is such a small Pokemon, it has its body is really well adapted to surviving these extreme temperatures. So Thick Fat shows this protection that it has against the cold, really cold environment, but also extra heat. So ice type attacks and fire type attacks will do less damage to Swinup. And that's everything for Swinup's moves and abilities. So while Swinup may not be the strongest Pokemon when it comes to battling, it has something which I think is more important, especially for the first stage Pokemon, which is the ability to survive, through its powerful sense of smell, its thick fur, and its determination. Swinup, is able to survive the frozen environment that it lives in. However, as you can imagine, I keep saying it is the first evolution, right? Swinup will not remain a small Swinup forever. After gaining enough experience, it will eventually evolve into a larger and much more powerful Pokemon. One with a stronger body, large tusks, and a very, very different appearance. So, without further ado, let's take a look at Swinup's first evolution, which is Piloswine. So, Piloswine evolves from Swinup after, beginning of experience. It still remains an ice and ground type Pokemon. However, it is now known as the Swine Pokemon. The Swine Pokemon. So, compared to little Swinup over here, Piloswine goes through a very big physical transformation. While Swinup is very small and very compact, as you can see, Piloswine is a lot larger, a lot stronger, and a lot more suited for navigating these really harsh and frozen environments. So, Piloswine, as you can see, measures around 1.1 meters tall, which is about 3 feet and 7 inches, and weighs around 55.8 kilograms, or about 123 pounds. Its body is now much bulkier, with thick, sort of shaggy fur covering almost its entire body. This fur grows so densely that Piloswine's face is really hard to see, as you can see here. And its eyes are almost completely hidden beneath its fur. And due to this, Piloswine still relies on its other senses. Just like Swinup, its sense of smell, it relies on it to navigate its surroundings. And just like Swinup, it will use its nose to search for food. However, unlike little Swinup over here, Piloswine is a lot larger and stronger, which allows it to actually dig through terrain and move through deeper snow easier. Another major change, which you can obviously see, are its big tusks that it has, right? It has two big tusks that, come out from the sides of its face, and these are not, obviously, they're not just for decoration, they're very strong tusks, and they are used for digging through snow, through ice, and as well as, defending itself when necessary. However, because its thick fur is covering a lot of its face, Piloswine might not always have a perfect awareness of its surroundings, This means that although it's very physically powerful, it often relies more on instinct and its heightened senses rather than, observing the surroundings. Not that it would need it in like a massive snowfall sort of weather, because, you can't really see that much in the snowfall anyways. Because obviously, it's still living in these cold environments. So, snowy mountains, icy fields, frozen regions, just like Swinup. However, its behavior is quite different after evolving, because, as I said, Swinup will spend a lot of its time carefully searching for food, but Piloswine is a lot more confident and a lot more powerful, and obviously it can move through snow a lot easier. Piloswine likes to live in areas where snow and ice will make it very difficult for many Pokemon to traverse, Yet Piloswine is very well adapted to these conditions, so while other Pokemon may be struggling in these areas, Piloswine is just thriving. It enjoys these harsher sort of conditions, So now you might be wondering, where does the name Piloswine come from? You can probably guess as well, right? At least some of it. So, it's a combination of the word Pylos and swine. So, swine obviously refers to pigs still, but what does Pylos mean? So, Pylos apparently means, to be covered with fine hair, which explains, the eyes being covered with hair. So there you go, Pylos and swine. So, now let's look at some of its moves and abilities, right? Let's start with its abilities, because they're quite simple. They're the exact 3 abilities that Swinup had. So, Oblivious, Snow Cloak, and Thick Fat. We've already explained them. No need to do it again. So, let's look at some of the moves. Piloswine can obviously learn stronger moves, especially when compared to Swinup, right? Because, it's a lot stronger. It has no body parts in its big tusks, and it's just a bigger and stronger Pokemon in general. So, for example, it learns moves such as Ice Fang, which it actually learns Ice Fang upon evolving, and it allows Piloswine to attack using its freezing fangs to deal damage, and maybe hopefully freeze the opponent. And another move that takes advantage of Piloswine's no body, no really big body, is Takedown. you might take a bit of damage, but you've taken more damage than me. And obviously, its new size and weight really allows it to charge forward and really deal some damage. So there you go, takedown. And finally, if you thought, oh, at least it's a big and slow Pokemon, it's not gonna, I can get away. Well, it also learns the move Ice Shard, which, allows Piloswine to create and launch sharp pieces of ice at the opponent. And this move is really useful because, as I said, Piloswine might not be super fast, but the move Ice Shard is really fast, right? It's almost like an ice type quick attack, if you wanna kind of say it like that. And it can attack really quickly, which makes it really scary because you're like, okay, at least this Pokemon is slow, but then it hits you with Ice Shard and you're like, okay, maybe it's not so slow. So that's some of Piloswine's most notable moves, I guess. Compared to Swinup, as we can see, its battle style has changed, while Swinup relies on like smaller attacks, I guess. Piloswine can use its really big body and increased size and strength, and obviously also its tusks to be able to pack more of a punch and be physically more powerful. So that will be everything for Piloswine. However, that is not the end of the evolutionary line. So, but as a little side note, right, Piloswine will evolve one more time, but the evolution method is a little bit strange, right? So, by learning the move known as Ancient Power, and obviously getting enough experience, Piloswine can evolve into an even stronger Pokemon. And this is Mamoswine. 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 So, as I said, after learning the move Ancient Power and gaining enough experience, Piloswine can evolve into its final form, which is Mamoswine, right? Mamoswine is still an ice and ground type Pokemon, but it is now known as the Twin Tusk Pokemon. You can probably imagine why, right? So, Mamoswine, I think, represents a massive transformation as well. It now measures 2.5 meters tall, or 8 feet and 2 inches, so over double the size of Piloswine, and it weighs around 291 kilograms, or 641.5 pounds. So, double the size of Piloswine, and especially if you compare it to Swinup, which only weighs around 6.5 kilos. Mamoswine is over 40 times heavier than little Swinup over here, which is a massive change, right? I know I clearly would not want to be in the way of one of them. So, as I said, one of Mamoswine's most recognizable features is its huge tusks that you can see, right? And a fun fact about these tusks is that they're actually made out of ice. And you may be wondering, what? Yeah, we actually have records that we can see that these tusks are actually made out of like really powerfully and really condensed ice. They're so powerful that they can smash easily through obstacles. And if one of the tusks break, they're made out of ice. They will gradually grow back in time, turn back over time. So these powerful tusks, combined with its huge, massive body and really thick coat of fur, make Mamoswine a really, really physically imposing ice-type Pokemon. One of the most imposing ice-type Pokemon, if you ask me personally. However, one of the most fascinating things about Mamoswine, in my opinion, it's sort of like connection to the ancient past and its history. According to several records that we have from other scientists, Mamoswine has been living for a long, long time. It is said that Mamoswine lived during an ancient era of the Pokemon world. In fact, Mamoswine has been identified in wall paintings, paintings in a wall from 10,000 years ago. So, it is a Pokemon that has been around for a while, and for a long time. It was actually believed that Mamoswine had become extinct. However, Mamoswine populations were eventually discovered once again, proving that, this sort of ancient Pokemon has survived until today. And this kind of links, in my opinion, with its fascinating evolutionary method, because unlike most Pokemon, Piloswine will not just get a lot of experience and then evolve. It has to learn the move Ancient Power in order to evolve. Scientists are still trying to figure out exactly why that's the case. However, I think that this connection to Mamoswine's like ancient history makes it really intriguing. Why is that this Pokemon that lived so long ago needs to learn specifically Ancient Power to evolve? Well, if you maybe in your studies go into Ice-type Pokemon or something like that, you might get a course that like teaches you a little bit more about that. So, like its previous evolutions, Mamoswine obviously is found in cold regions. It has an immense strength, and this strength allows it to move through deep snow, really thick snow, with almost no difficulty, while its thick fur obviously still protects it from these like really cold, freezing temperatures. Now, it's a massive Pokemon that is adapted to these icy conditions very well. Its body is built for enduring the conditions that would be horrendous for any of the Pokemon, and for humans as well. But first for Mamoswine, it's just another normal day. Now let's take a moment to look at Mamoswine's moves and abilities. And fun fact, just like Swinup and Piloswine, Mamoswine gets the exact same 3 abilities: Oblivious, Snow Cloak, and Thick Fat. We're not going to go over them again, so don't worry. However, it does get a lot of really strong moves. Starting off with Earthquake, which is, I would say, probably the most iconic ground-type move of all time. But it also learns really strong Ice-type moves, such as Icicle Crash, which allows Mamoswine to attack by dropping enormous icicles onto its opponents, and it also has a chance to make the opponent flinch. It also learns the move High Horsepower, which is a ground-type attack, which Mamoswine will basically charge directly into its opponent with tremendous amount of force. And given how big and heavy and physically strong Mamoswine is, this move is perfect for Mamoswine and horrible for whoever's receiving that move. And lastly, we obviously have to look at perhaps its most interesting move, right, which is going to be Ancient Power. Now this is actually a rock-type move that attacks the opponent with this sort of prehistoric power. And as we learned earlier, this is also a move that is required for Piloswine to actually evolve into Mamoswine, which is, exactly why mastering the move Ancient Power is very important for Piloswine if it's looking to evolve. So yeah, I definitely had to mention Ancient Power as one of the moves because it's very, very crucial for Piloswine and also Mamoswine. You're not getting a Mamoswine without the move, let's leave it at that. And with that being said, I think I've talked for long enough. I think this will be everything for Mamoswine, and also this will be the end of today's lesson. So, although there's still much that we have to learn about Pokemon, every species teaches us something new about the incredible Pokemon world that we share. And today, I just hope Swinup, Piloswine, and Mamoswine did that. So, thank you so much for coming to today's class, and I'll hopefully see you on the next one. Bye bye. Oh hey, you're still here, huh? Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. As some of you may know, this video, this Pokemon, I guess, was actually the winner of a recent little poll that we did. So thank you so much to everyone who voted. It's always fun to put these videos together. I feel like I learned so much about Pokemon as well, so this is great. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to support the channel a little bit further, you can always leave a donation on my little coffee page. Absolutely no pressure though. But of course, every bit of support helps me make more Pokemon lessons just like this. And if you have any hopefully it will win, and we'll get to all of them eventually. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. Take care, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Drink some water, put on some sunscreen. It is hot. Okay, bye. Oh, and like and subscribe.